Story 1. I am more concerned that individuals with any level of dementia can hold public office. This applies to anyone on either side of the aisle, not just one person specifically. Story 2. The uneducated can also vote. I do not mean people who did not go to school. I mean people who did not read anything about the election or those who vote based on a single issue. I honestly do not see much of a difference. Story 3. That is better than allowing the ruling party to decide which individuals have dementia and are thus ineligible to vote. Story 4. I'm less concerned about the dementia voters than those who are voting while being clueless, gullible, and uneducated on the facts. Story 5. I seriously doubt there are enough people with advanced dementia voting to make any political difference. A very small percentage of people have dementia. I don't think you realize how debilitating advanced dementia is if you believe people are going out to vote. Advanced dementia pretty much means an individual is at the end of life. Story 6. Yes, they technically can. But do they? Have you ever met someone with advanced dementia? Let's be realistic about this. It's not a problem that requires anyone to think about it. Story 7. If you believe in democracy, you must acknowledge that millions of people will cast votes with compromised judgment for various reasons. This could be due to dementia, social media misinformation, manipulative advertisements, superstition, ignorance, or plain lack of understanding. In America, there will always be an enormous uninformed and emotional electorate, and including those with dementia does not significantly alter this reality. Story 8. Where do you draw the line? Individuals with bipolar disorder can vote, but not if they are also experiencing depression, or if they are forgetful but not excessively so. Story 9. I work in a nursing home, and part of my job last week was helping patients with advanced dementia vote. Voting for them basically means guiding them to the voting station, putting the ballot in front of them, handing them a pen, watching them be confused about what to do for a minute, and then taking them back to their room. We can't fill it out for them because that would be fraud, but we have to give them the opportunity, as that is their right. However, I promise most of them aren't actually voting for anything. The few who still remember how to fill out a ballot are not going to have enough voting power to make any significant difference. Story 10. I fully support it. Every legal citizen should have the right to vote permanently, including felons. There should never be any cause or mechanism by which the government can revoke your right to vote. Story 11. I don't see how that is any different from the majority of the voting population, so I have no problem with it. Story 12. If you haven't noticed, the general public often struggles to understand complex topics. Even those who are considered good at their jobs may be efficient in a narrow way, like fitting a square peg into a square hole. Additionally, individuals with dementia are not participating in voting as much. Story 13. I think it is 100% guaranteed that adult citizens have rights. They are responsible for continuing to pay taxes. How could a vote be incorrect? That is the better question. Story 14. The number of people with advanced dementia who can successfully vote is a small percentage of the population, so I am not concerned about it. However, taking office is a completely different issue. Story 15. It is the cost of democracy, less a factor than allowing unqualified individuals to vote. Where is the line and who gets to decide? Story 16. Just because individuals have dementia does not mean they are no longer citizens. If they have the mental capacity to register to vote and to cast their vote, then I see no problem with it. However, if someone is taking advantage of a person with dementia and forcing them to vote, then that is entirely illegal. Story 17. Not great, but arguing that a certain level of mental acuity should exclude someone from voting is a dangerous path to pursue. Story 18. Not many people have advanced dementia. It makes more sense to be concerned about regular individuals, who constitute 2/3 of the voting population, and their uninformed votes. Story 19. Without additional information about the hypothetical individuals affected by dementia, I feel similarly to how I feel about approximately 60 to 75% of the general population. I am completely serious. Story 20. People with dementia cannot vote, but they can hold public office. Felons cannot vote, but they can be president. Feels backwards to me. Story 21. I am curious about what you mean by advanced dementia. People in stage 7 can only speak a limited number of words and are almost always unable to read or write. I do not see how they could possibly vote. Even if there was a situation where a helper read them the ballot and assisted them in filling it out, it would be nearly impossible to get them to answer questions about who they want to vote for. If we are discussing stage 6, that is where my dad is. He is in pretty bad shape and cannot dress himself or brush his teeth, but he is aware and articulate about the fact that he dislikes one political party and supports the other. Therefore, I had no issue with him participating in mail-in voting. I brought him his ballot, allowed him to mark it, and mailed it for him. Story 22. Here's the thing. It's better than the alternative. Because what is the alternative? Establishing an intelligence quotient requirement to vote places us back in the territory of poll taxes and literacy tests. The standardized test used to determine voter eligibility can be manipulated and misapplied to disenfranchise any group that the government currently disfavors. Stipulating that individuals cannot vote if they have a certain diagnosis creates a situation where medical data must be disclosed to the government for voter registration, which is concerning. This approach overlooks that conditions like dementia are not binary. There are degrees of impairment and periods of clarity. Furthermore, if an individual is never diagnosed, they may still be voting while experiencing cognitive decline. This raises the issue of allowing the government to test individuals, which, aside from medical privacy concerns, could lead to weaponized diagnostics, an idea just as problematic, if not worse, than establishing an intelligence quotient requirement. Story 23. The last 3 presidential elections show that individuals with advanced dementia can be elected. Story 24. Dementia voters are no worse than uninformed voters. If you vote a certain way because someone told you to, you are not making an informed choice. Get informed and vote in your own best interest. Story 25. I am less concerned than others that people with advanced dementia can become president and proceed to destroy everything they touch. They seem incapable of understanding the concept of tariffs, regardless of how many people, even their own supporters, explain it to them. Story 26. I'm not concerned about them voting. I am concerned with the millions of people who do not have advanced dementia but vote as if they are middle schoolers. Story 27. Neutral. Just because someone has a disability that affects their bodily functions and memory does not give people the right to exclude them from voting. Story 28. I feel better about it than I would any government attempt to disqualify someone from voting due to a medical condition or disability. The likelihood of a group of individuals with advanced dementia influencing any given election, in a way they wouldn't otherwise do to their condition, is astronomically small compared to the damage and disenfranchisement that would result from trying to prevent such an outcome. Let's spend $5 billion to prevent the loss of $5. Story 29. Is it an academic question? I mean, okay, maybe they can, but do you really think they are? By the time someone has advanced dementia, are they able to remember much of anything in a normal routine? Story 30. I am curious about who with advanced dementia is voting. This is a genuine question. Advanced dementia is more than just misplacing keys. It significantly affects a person's ability to function. My grandmother had dementia that progressed very quickly, and towards the end, she could barely hold her head up and could not feed herself. She had already struggled with walking before this, and I believe she would not have been able to walk. Before anyone gets upset, I am genuinely asking how often this situation occurs. Referring again to my grandmother, taking her to vote did not cross any of our minds, nor did obtaining an absentee ballot. Story 31. Voting is our constitutional right. The Constitution applies to all citizens, not just those you favor. That is how it should work. People with dementia may be significantly outnumbered by the uninformed. Story 32. I never understood why criminals cannot vote, even after they have served their time, but a person with 34 convictions can run for president. Story 33. No, not at all. It's not as if there are many voters with dementia lined up at the polls. Nevertheless, it is everyone's right to vote. Story 34. How do you feel about the fact that any standard for voting eligibility will be used selectively against groups believed to be political opponents of those responsible for applying the standards? Story 35. Cognitive ability should be considered for the right to vote at any age. I believe individuals should not be allowed to vote if they are incapable of distinguishing reality from obvious fiction, regardless of the reason. Story 36. The 26th Amendment allows all citizens aged 18 or older to vote. What you are referring to is what conservatives fear: citizens voting. They are concerned that people are being assisted in the voting process. The real question is, what are they afraid of? Free and fair elections differentiate the United States from many countries around the world. Those in power cannot control the outcome when a large number of people vote, and there is a public paper trail that shows the results. Story 37. Like it's irrelevant since they are a minuscule percentage of the population. Their holding office is a bit more concerning, but it would set a dangerous precedent to start barring people from office on medical grounds. At one time or another, holding a position incompatible with the mainstream narrative has been deemed a pathology. Being gay, for example, was once considered a disorder. Story 38. Illiterate people can vote, individuals who never read the news can vote, and people with mental disabilities can vote. Story 39. They are entitled to vote. What do you think about the fact that people without dementia do not bother to vote? A full third of eligible voters did not vote in the last election. That is approximately 80 million people. How does that compare to the few thousand people with dementia who randomly vote? It is likely that their votes balance each other out. Story 40. It's not great, but let's be honest for a moment about the actual severity of this issue. Namely, it's nowhere near as severe as it might sound. If every person in the United States over 65 with a level of dementia, approximately 7 million, voted, they would only account for about 4.5% of the voting turnout. But that's making a big assumption that they will all somehow get out there and vote. In reality, only about 2/3 of people vote, so they would really only make up about 3% of the voter turnout, even if we're being generous. After all, mentally healthy people skip voting too. But do you think a person with dementia is going to be diligent about it? 3% isn't insignificant, but it's not terrible. Additionally, if someone with advanced dementia is getting to the polls, they are likely being guided by a family member who can assist them. While you can argue the ethics of it, it is likely that if that family member has encouraged the person to go to the polls, they have been coaching and guiding their decisions for a while. Therefore, I would assume the vote is really coming from the family member more than the person with dementia. My point is that it's going to be a very small portion of the population casting votes on their own accord due to dementia. Certainly not in large enough blocks to deliberately swing the election one way or another. Story 41. Let them vote. There are many people who do not vote. In fact, most elections see the majority of eligible voters abstaining. If those individuals participated, the small percentage of mentally unwell people would be negligible. Story 42. Speaking as someone who has had family members with dementia, neither of them voted when it was apparent there was a problem. They knew elections were happening but didn't ask about someone bringing them in to vote. That's not to say they weren't beginning to have issues when they voted in previous elections. I'm not a doctor, so I can't say whether they did or didn't, but it wasn't so severe that they couldn't get there and fill out their ballot on their own. I don't think we should take that right away from people just because they are a certain age and might have issues. I just don't believe there are many people with dementia who could fill out a ballot correctly. Story 43. I don't think dementia systematically affects a person's political alignment, so any potential biases should balance each other out on average. Selectively determining who can and cannot vote is a slippery slope, so I believe the additional variance is acceptable in this context. Story 44. Vote? You can even be president with advanced stage dementia, as the past two presidents have demonstrated. Story 45. They are a small enough percentage of the population that it is negligible. Most of them are not going to be voting anyway. Requiring cognitive testing to be allowed to vote would create a much bigger problem than what it is trying to solve. Story 46. Why shouldn't they? Unless you want to give everyone a test to vote, it makes no sense to pick and choose which adults can vote. Story 47. That is still their right. People with disabilities have the same rights. If they choose to participate, then that is their victory and we should applaud that. Story 48. Fine. If they have the ability to fill out the ballot and ensure it gets counted, then that is sufficient. We have enough methods of voter suppression available. Story 49. They are not a significant portion of the population, so it does not make a difference. Declaring a person incompetent is a clear pathway to abuse. Story 50. Do I think they should vote? No. Do I think they should be barred from voting? No. The population is not large enough for it to be consequential, and preventing people from voting is always problematic. Story 51. My son receives a voter card, just like me. He has significant developmental delays and will never vote. However, I did vote last Friday at the early polls. Story 52. Medically disqualifying people from voting is a slippery slope. Who decides who lacks the agency to make personal decisions? Once a line is drawn regarding dementia, what about individuals with mental disabilities or lower education? The discussion continues endlessly. Story 53. You know who else suffers from dementia? Story 54. It is not much different from allowing religious fanatics to vote. People who can hardly read and those who lack a clear understanding of economics, history, and science can also vote and be eligible to participate. Story 55. They still have rights. They are also about 0.00001% of the voting population, and chances are they do not even bother voting as it is difficult to get to the polls or they simply forgo absentee ballots. We would need to have a strict definition of the level of dementia that deems a person unable to vote and assess every patient accordingly. To deny such a right due to involuntary circumstances would not be just. Story 56. I believe that any restriction on who can vote to prevent issues like this will create more problems than it solves. There are many individuals with neurological disorders that render them unable to enter binding legal agreements, face criminal responsibility, and in some cases even leave an institution. These restrictions are effective because the incentives in place to make the determination are mostly pragmatic rather than political. While it may seem logical to apply the same standards to restrict the right to vote, it could also create a harmful incentive for powerful political organizations to influence those who determine fitness to vote in order to disqualify opposing voters. It is better to accept some irregularities at the ballot box from the few patients with debilitating neurological disorders who choose to vote than to establish an institution that makes judgments about who is fit to vote based on largely subjective criteria. Story 57. That's not good. You should be fully aware when making a decision like that. Are you allowed to cast a vote if you show up drunk? That's a real question. Story 58. The fact that you believe someone with advanced dementia can leave the house without assistance, let alone make a plan to vote, indicates a lack of understanding about dementia. This post appears to be an attempt to provoke a reaction for your own agenda. Story 59. That's not an issue you want to deal with. Who else cannot vote? How do you fairly administer a mental purity test for voting? Story 60. I'm fine with it. When voters have someone assisting them with their vote, I always ask the voter if they are comfortable with it. I inform them that I can read the ballot and operate the computer for them. It is usually a spouse or child. Story 61. I am more concerned with the single-issue crowd, the ones so focused on one tree that they cannot even see any other tree, much less the overall forest. Story 62. I'll be honest, I don't think many people with advanced dementia are going out to vote. I observed that with both my grandparents. They were not at the polls during the last couple of elections. Story 63. I feel having someone decide who is able-bodied enough to vote is a slippery slope, especially these days. Don't you? I believe we have had this conversation before. Story 64. If we can take away their right to vote, we can take away anyone's by simply changing the definition of unqualified. Story 65. The government using ability or skill tests, initially for the informed, would inevitably be used to solidify power through targeted implementation against specific groups of people. No test, no tax, no barrier to vote. Even a mass murderer should have a vote. It's the same concept as due process. If not protected, it will be eroded and turned into a weapon. Story 66. Speaking as an election judge, they are not the least informed individuals who show up to vote. I estimate that at least 10% of voters select the first candidate listed for nonpartisan races. We ensure that people are not being coerced or told how to vote at the polls. Additionally, I have conducted the manual recount for my area, which includes reviewing mail-in ballots. We receive ballots from individuals who appear to be of unsound mind. They may write in candidates from the past, mark multiple candidates in one race, or otherwise invalidate their ballots. Canada's laws regarding voting for individuals with cognitive impairments are somewhat unique. However, if you witness voter coercion, such as someone instructing a voter on how to cast their ballot, or if you observe others voting on behalf of individuals through mail-in ballots, you should notify your elections department, not a social media platform. Story 67. It's really no different than the majority of voters who make decisions based on little information, or perhaps based on whatever their last social media post told them to think. For the record, I feel quite disappointed about it. Story 68. 2 points. I would prefer a rational person with advanced dementia voting intelligently, even if they are voting as if it is 1962, over someone merely trying to fit in with the popular crowd. Also, one of the fundamental principles of democracy is that you do not interfere with voter rights. You do not judge what is or is not an acceptable state of mind for casting a ballot. If they are capable of filling out a ballot, they are fit to vote. It is far less concerning that a small number of people might choose to vote for Jimmy Carter than it is for us to complain that someone else cast a ballot that we do not think they should have. Like everything else related to their ballot, it is none of your business. Story 69. I presume individuals with mental disabilities are entitled to vote as well, including those with very low IQs. Are you suggesting we discriminate against them all? Story 70. I am fine with it. Being old should not indicate a loss of rights. If Reddit users can vote, then so should the elderly and those with cognitive impairments. Story 71. I am strongly opposed to the idea of removing voting rights from any individual or group. I believe it is too dangerous to allow the disenfranchisement of anyone. If someone dies or renounces their citizenship, that is acceptable. However, if a state has the ability to revoke someone's voting rights, then it should not be allowed. This applies to mental health issues, felonies, or political beliefs, as any criteria established for the first two will likely be misused for the latter, leading to a democracy in name only. The following 3 requirements are the only ones I consider valid. Citizenship, for national elections. Residency, for local elections. Not having voted in this election in this or another precinct, no double voting. Story 72. As long as they fill out their ballot, I am fine with it. If you can make your selection, you can vote regardless of who you choose. If you cannot make your mark, assigned power of attorney on your behalf is the only other exception. Someone may cast an extra vote for their parent, but no one should be dropping off more than a couple of votes at a drop box. Story 73. I believe there are fewer voters with advanced dementia participating in elections compared to able voters whose rights may be suppressed if a person is declared unfit to exercise their constitutional right to vote. A system that limits voting rights cannot be justified unless there is unquestionable trust in the process, which we do not have. Story 74. I would rather allow some dementia patients to vote than give the government the power to mark us as ineligible to vote based on an unsupported diagnosis. When a significant portion of the population is of prime dementia age, we need to find a solution. Story 75. Everyone needs to be able to vote, regardless of their mental capacity to comprehend issues. If not, the government can easily claim that certain individuals they find disagreeable are ineligible to vote and pass laws that could be used against anyone. While I may disagree with it, I recognize that it is essential for the rights of everyone to ensure that all individuals have the ability to vote as well. Story 76. A voting system that only allows people I consider worthy to vote is essentially a dictatorship with additional steps. Additionally, I would expect voters with advanced dementia to largely cancel each other out. I am more concerned about the willfully uninformed, as they tend to vote in alignment. Ultimately, I would prefer a system that allows for uninformed voting rather than one where I have no opportunity to vote out poorly informed choices. Story 77. It is functionally impossible to deal with, but I believe the number of votes supporting this is small enough that it is more practical to ignore. Additionally, whether or not someone has dementia, they still have rights. Story 78. It's similar to transgender athletes. There is not enough to constitute any significant issue, and the solution involves considerable disruption and discrimination that can be exploited, such as re-implementing tests similar to those during the Jim Crow era. Therefore, it is not worth worrying about. It would be nice if both issues were treated similarly. Story 79. I believe the number of individuals with advanced dementia who are actually voting is negligible. If more people who are cognitively aware and oriented exercise their votes, the impact of any votes from individuals with dementia would be even less significant. Story 80. Not too bad, since I know that votes do not count and that candidates are pre-selected in boardrooms by corporations, so it does not matter either way. Story 81. Nothing about this suggestion is acceptable. The cost of implementation, potential for corruption, and bureaucratic complications would far outweigh the benefits, which may only amount to a few thousand votes at best. Given the current climate, it is likely that he would escalate the situation from denying support to individuals with dementia to denying support to those with mental illnesses. It is commonly perceived that they equate liberal beliefs with mental illness. Story 82. I feel great about it. People can vote if they believe others are illegal. People can vote without having learned anything about those running for election. Some may believe that same-sex couples should not be allowed to marry. Others may think that Black individuals cannot feel pain. For some reason, we do not choose these individuals as targets. Instead, we select hypothetical advanced dementia patients, which suggests that individuals with cognitive impairments deserve democracy above all. Story 83. My mom has dementia, and she barely wants to leave the house. I'm sure many people suffering from dementia share this experience. This is the least of our concerns regarding the political climate. Story 84. I spent 7 years working with individuals with dementia and their caregivers. Anecdotally, I do not believe it is as serious an issue as often perceived. People were either so far advanced that voting was the last thing on their minds, these individuals needed reminders just to go to the bathroom, or they were in a mild to moderate stage, during which they did not suddenly and inexplicably change their systems of morals, ethics, or political beliefs. In other words, most individuals with dementia who supported the political right would have supported it even without the condition, and most lifelong progressives would have likewise voted for progressive candidates. Most people in mild to moderate stages still had their moral compass and were not simply attaching themselves to one movement or another. Cases where individuals experienced sudden personality shifts and became susceptible to extreme political views were exceedingly rare, usually associated with frontal-temporal dementia. However, politicians with dementia present a different concern. Story 85. You have to be very careful when taking away voting rights. If you create a process to declare someone unfit to vote, it will be manipulated by politicians. Story 86. Just fine with it, because any kind of competency test to be allowed to vote will be abused by those seeking to gain or maintain power. Testing people on something ultimately subjective to determine if those in power will grant them the right to vote will always be a bad idea. Always. Story 87. If an elderly person can go to the polls and fill in the ballot themselves, I have no issue with them voting. However, I do not support absentee ballots for everyone. Story 88. I may be wrong, but as someone who has known multiple people with advanced dementia, I don't think these individuals are voting. The only situation I can envision where this might happen is if they are being pressured by acquaintances. In that case, I believe this is a more urgent issue than the previous one. Story 89. The majority of eligible voters do not vote in the United States. At this point, perhaps everything needs to collapse so something new can be built. America is no longer thriving. Story 90. First of all, you'd be surprised how dementia works. Not everyone experiences the same type, and just because some memories may be unreliable, some individuals remember specific things better than others. There is no reason someone couldn't retain their political views and beliefs. In healthcare, we emphasize that individuals with dementia should always be consulted, as they can still make decisions and aren't simply disregarded. Story 91. The basis of democracy is that everyone has a voice that is worth the same as the voice of any other. It is the great equalizer. Introducing intelligence quotient requirements for voting raises many issues. Who will represent those with low intelligence or dementia? What is the concern about allowing a person with dementia to vote? Is it a lack of ability to think critically compared to a healthy person? Even intelligent individuals often vote without considering the real-world implications. People lead busy and increasingly individualistic lives. How can we determine which votes reflect appropriate thought and the use of intellect? It is important to note that some individuals vote for the same party throughout their lives merely out of loyalty. I'm a supporter of X. Where do we draw the line? Should people have to justify their vote in writing to demonstrate that they have considered it carefully? Who has the authority to reject votes, and how can we prevent corruption? We should prioritize whether the leaders we elect are of sound mind. Story 92. I am more concerned that individuals with dementia, like Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell, can be elected to office. One vote is one vote. One elected official is a tactical weapon in the wrong hands. Story 93. Most elected representatives have dementia. For people with advanced dementia, voting is likely not a priority when they cannot remember their own children. What is even more concerning is uninformed individuals casting their votes. Story 94. My grandma had severe dementia and didn't even know my name, but she still received a mail-in ballot. It made me feel strange, like she had no idea who the candidates were. I honestly don't know if that vote reflected her true will or if someone else filled it out. That kind of scared me. Story 95. In addition to voters with advanced dementia, supporters of a certain political figure who has multiple felony convictions are also allowed to vote, and there isn't much difference between these two groups of voters. Story 96. My 92-year-old grandmother can't remember what she had for dinner, but knows that Donald is awful, so I'm fine with it. Story 97. We had a former president with dementia, and no one cared. So why should we worry about voters with dementia? Story 98. Voting does not accomplish anything. It is merely for show. We have the resources to meet everyone's needs, yet some individuals insist on accumulating enough for a billion people. There would be no need for voting if our systems were focused on advancing the human race. Story 99. They don't usually, do they? In my province, there was recently a scandal when someone working for the Conservative Party started taking people out of a care facility, apparently with the intent of getting them to vote for their party. I think we may need better protections to prevent this kind of behavior, but I don't think I'd want to take away people's right to vote to do it. Story 100. If someone with dementia accidentally voted for a fascist, I would at least understand the confusion. What is harder to explain is the millions of fully lucid voters who watched Donald Trump incite an insurrection on live television, be found liable for sexual abuse, accumulate felony charges like trading cards, and still thought, yes, that is my candidate. If that is what mental clarity looks like, maybe we should let the dementia patients try. They could not possibly do worse than the supposedly sane Republicans. Story 101. Everyone knows that the former president had a seriously diminished capacity that worsened towards the end of his term. I understand there will be many opinions regarding Trump, but we do not truly know who was running the country during that time. That should concern both political parties. Story 102. There is a common misconception that the purpose of democracy is to achieve the best outcome. However, if you want the best outcome, you would be better off relying on a single expert, such as a doctor, lawyer, or plumber, rather than on 10 random people voting. The purpose of democracy is to do what most people want. Look at the United States. The outcome may be unfavorable, but people are generally satisfied because they voted for it, except for those who did not support it. During President Biden's administration, it was the opposite situation. There is a psychological effect that makes us more likely to agree with something if we participated in it. That is the essence of democracy. Story 103. It's a good question. This is definitely a negative situation. I just can't see many of them going to a voting booth, however. Story 104. There is no difference between someone with advanced dementia and an 18-year-old who only consumes TikTok as a news source when voting. Story 105. Who decides what too advanced is? That's what scares me more. Just someone making a declaration can get you sent to El Salvador these days without a day in court. Story 106. Reagan had Alzheimer's symptoms while in office, and Trump is showing signs. If you worry about voters, why not the people who get elected? Story 107. To be honest, dementia is strange. My mom is fully aware of who the president is and who she wanted to vote for. You cannot apply a blanket restriction on individuals with dementia. Trust me, as a caregiver, I will not go through the trouble of having her vote if she does not understand it. There is far too much else to do. Story 108. We recently had a president with dementia serve a full term, and then we elected a successor who may also be in the early stages of the condition. Story 109. Vote? We just had a president for 4 years. Most of the staff and mainstream media deceive everyone and then pretend to be shocked on debate night. Give me a break. Who ran the country? Who operated the auto pen? It wasn't Joe. Story 110. Well, if they can be a United States president, they should at least be allowed to vote. They are still better than 51% of the so-called able-minded. Story 111. Considering that the average American voter may lack awareness, I don't worry too much about individuals with dementia. Story 112. Unless it has been medically and legally verified, I believe that nothing regarding voter registration rules or laws can stop it. Story 113. Don't they have proxy voting? I work for an investment company, and most of our clients are elderly. It is unfortunate when we have to conduct security checks or go through information with them, and they struggle to keep up. However, they can have a power of attorney. Story 114. They can drive too. I am not trying to be judgmental. It is difficult to reason with a smart, grown woman who has lost her way. Story 115. Most individuals do not have the ability to reach the voting office. Competency tests have significant legal implications and require time to complete. By the time a person reaches stages 3 or 4 of dementia, life expectancy is low. Story 116. They can also hold public office. Consider this for a moment. People will vote for individuals with dementia to serve in public office. And it's bipartisan, so everyone is represented. Story 117. I am definitely concerned, but I am a little less concerned about the fact that individuals with the same or more severe mental health conditions can be in the office and are allowed to make executive decisions. Story 118. When you put that idea out there, it may not sound great. However, you need to consider the alternatives. Frankly, I don't trust that excluding people with Alzheimer's from voting won't be abused. So, while it's not ideal, it's better than what the solution would require. Story 119. The same way I feel about 18-year-olds. There is no fair way to determine fitness to participate in our democracy, so the franchise must be made available to all adults. Story 120. The issue is where to draw the line. Citizens have the right to vote, and one could argue they are not much different from those who have a narrow focus and vote for a candidate based on a single issue, or simply because of gender. Some voted against Obama because they genuinely believed he was not an American citizen. All these individuals can vote for whoever they choose, for any reason. Then there are those with psychotic disorders or severe mood disorders who may struggle with rational thought or remain oriented. Should they have to prove their competency to vote? While it may not be ideal for someone with severely impaired reasoning skills to influence leadership, people already vote for a variety of reasons and motivations. Story 121. It is complicated. I believe protecting voting rights is vital, but so is ensuring the integrity of the process. The key may lie in safeguards around how ballots are cast, especially absentee or mail-in, rather than banning a whole group from voting outright. There also needs to be more clarity and consistency in how we handle mental incapacity legally and ethically. Story 122. I'd rather have that than have a threshold that determines if you are mentally well enough to vote. Who makes that decision? Story 123. Would individuals with advanced dementia even be aware of their actions at a voting booth? Mental lapses and cognitive decline are one aspect, but those with advanced dementia do not go about their daily lives unassisted. That is why you seldom see well-known individuals in public after some time. What a misguided question. Story 124. can vote and remembering to vote are two different actions. My grandmother could have voted in 2008 and 2012, but my grandfather knew she would have an extremely difficult time voting because she would not know what to do and would start crying. Story 125. After living with a grandmother who is suffering from serious dementia, this is concerning. I was unaware of this. Is there a definition for when dementia becomes too severe for voting? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.